This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity Center podcast. I am Jeff, and I am flying solo today. Jim is out on assignment, as we say in the business. So you've got just me, but I've got two great guests with us joining. Before I get to that, just want to say this is the first episode that we're recording here in 2026. So if I haven't heard from you, Happy New Year. We got a lot of different things planned for the rest of this year. We've got some conferences coming up. Jim and I are planning on being in Berlin for the EIC conference in May. We got Identiverse in Las Vegas in June. I'm sure Authenticate will come around in October, and then Gartner at the end of the year as well. So lots of things coming on. We've got discount codes for as many things you can find. So you want to make sure you hit the website, idacpodcast.com. If you scroll down, I've got all the latest discount codes there. I believe we've got our EIC code up already, and I'm working on getting the Identiverse one. So if you haven't registered already, those are great ways to show support. It doesn't cost you anything, just shows that we can bring a crowd to these conferences and have a good time. I also want to thank everyone who showed up for the Identiverse in DC at the end of last year, as well as Gartner. We played our Majority Rules game show at both of those and had a great time. So if you missed it, you should have hung out, man. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun. And I'm sure we'll bring it to future conferences later this year as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. 2026 starts off with a bang. This is a series that we started off last year with our colleagues here at RSM, kind of talking about the intersection of cybersecurity and X, or identity and X or Y, or whatever it may look like. Today, we're going to talk about the intersection of identity with resilience and recovery. And to help me with that conversation, I'm very pleased to have a couple of my colleagues here that I've worked with at RSM. We've got Rich Servillas. He's a director from our cyber response group at RSM. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thank you. So thanks for having me. As Jeff said here, I spend most of my time in the middle of major incidents. I help organizations get control of situations like ransomware, account compromise, business email compromises, cloud intrusions, and investigations. So really focusing, helping their leadership where they need those answers really fast. So what this looks like is on the reactive side, I'm coordinating work streams. So think of containment, think of forensics, remediation, recovery, all those things that help businesses make those decisions under pressure. So really that's the core focus of what I'm bringing to the table.
So I'm going to make a joke, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way, but you're kind of like the person that you probably don't want it to be talking to, because that means typically something has happened. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of the phone calls that I get are either on Friday evening or over on the weekends. And that's really where nobody wants to talk to me, and nobody's ever calling me saying, hey, everything's okay. It's usually there's a fire, help us put it out.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about that background before I introduce our other guest. Tell me normally the question I would ask would be, how did you get into identity? But I'm going to pivot a little bit and say, how did you get into cybersecurity? Kind of take me through your background here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say my interest in solving problems got me into this space. Started a very, very long time ago. I'd say almost 10, 15 years ago. Started doing the core elements of incident response. So, e-discovery, litigation, got into that space, and then worked my way up through investigations. Essentially started leading a team. Then from there, got more into the leadership space, and that's really where the firefighting got started. So, really got my bones, getting my hands dirty, and now really just running a lot of air traffic control, making sure everyone's happy, and making sure that we are successful as a team.
So I'm sure we're going to get into pretty much all of that, Rich, as part of our conversation. But let me go ahead and introduce our other guest. He is Charles John. He is a director of operational resilience here at RSM. Welcome to the show, Chuck.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. Really pleased to be here. Appreciate it. Good to see you again, Rich. I bring to the table as in a supporting role to Rich. So I lead RSM's operational resilience team, which we define as crisis management, business continuity, the non-technical IT disaster recovery programs, both in the public and private sector, where I spend most of my time focusing on emergency management, crisis management, and business continuity. So those are collaborative functions with cybersecurity in the world of preparedness, response, and recovery.
So I kind of joke that you probably don't want to be talking to Rich until it's too late. But Chuck, you're the kind of person we should be talking to, because resiliency should be built into everything we do. It seems to me sometimes it might be something that's a little bit of an afterthought sometimes in the rush to get things stood up. But from a basic knowledge setting perspective, give us like the 101 level of what is business continuity and the disaster recovery look like, and where does that resilience come in?
Sure. So the resilience is going to come in on the preparing side, so the planning side, and so really at the top of the pyramid is crisis management, which is all hazards, all events, the management and coordination of an entity's response and recovery to any disaster event, any crisis event. The business continuity portion is all of the planning and activities and strategies that go into maintaining your business when there is a disaster. Again, that's any disaster. So that could be a cyber attack. That could be a natural event like a mudslide or a hurricane. So the continuity portion is really identifying and addressing the strategies and activities, get those put in place so that your critical elements of your business can be maintained during and following a disaster.
So when do you start the planning? And I'm sure you're going to say like right away, right at the very beginning.
Always, yeah. An organization should never stop planning. It is truly the hallmark of successful responses and recoveries following a crisis event is part of that begins at the planning stage. So in that preparedness part of training, exercises, building the plans themselves, communication generally is where event response fails is right out of the gate with communication and having frameworks and plans in place with folks that are trained and know how to use them is really paramount to guiding a company through a disaster event.
So if the best time to start planning was yesterday, I'm guessing the second best time is today.
Correct. Correct. Absolutely.
So let's say I need to set up whatever my plan looks like. Can you talk me through just at a very high level of like, what does that look like from a process standpoint? Like, what should I be thinking about if I'm listening to this? And, most people listening to this are going to be identity security type people.
Sure.
But they are running systems that are really securing the entire organization because, identity is such a, central part of security apparatus these days. Talk to me about how I would go about setting up that plan. What are the things that I should be thinking about?
Sure. I mean, you're talking to kind of someone who spent his career in emergency response. So safety and security is first. So we're on the physical side of safety and security, with the workforce today being very mobile, access. So I know we're talking about identity access here. I'm talking about access to whatever it is that you use. So access to the internet for one. We have a ton of third-party products. How do you access those products to do your job? And so then the part of that on the planning side is figuring out what those are, what are the most important ones, because not everything is critical every moment of every day. And what can we live with? What can we live without for a specific time frame? And the critical number of people needed to perform their job in an event. And what often goes overlooked in disasters, especially in the planning side here, is everybody assumes information technology is going to be fully staffed and that the people are always available to do what's needed for any organization. And so that part often is overlooked as part of the planning, that what happens if the IT or the information security team is 10% unavailable, 15% unavailable, 20% unavailable. That poses a huge problem on the planning side.
Yeah, I mean, what if something happens, right? What if a hurricane hits Asheville, North Carolina, and you don't have water or power for a month or 2 months? Not that happened, to me last year.
Right.
We made it fine. That's fine. But those are real scenarios, right? These things happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they have to be planned for.
So I'm curious, how did you get into this space of like business continuity? I asked Rich about his background and sort of how he got into cybersecurity, but how did you get into this world of continuity and disaster recovery and planning and all that stuff?
So I got into the actual industry just a little bit after 9/11. I joined one of the Department of Energy national laboratories, and my introduction was into emergency management and public health preparedness. My background and academic training is generally in public health preparedness and response, and so I started out there 20 plus years ago, and then as response and preparedness and exercises and training became more to the forefront, while the first responder agencies and partners had been doing it for years and years. It was something that seemed to come more to light in the private sector, and as these disciplines and these programs around crisis management and business continuity and cyber um, all started to show that they needed to be collaborating with one another and that they were mutually supportive programs and should not be done in isolation to one another. That's what eventually led me into cyber to partner with my colleagues in the cyber practice here.
What is the thing that I guess the most transferable skill taken from your prior days to cyber side of things?
Hmm. That's a good question. I would say the actually the ability to lead and collaborate across multiple disciplines to talk again, that communication aspect of the planning, and to understand how each discipline, and then in this case each department has dependencies upon one another in some shape or form. And I would say that was probably the most transferable of the skills, is to communicate strongly and to be able to listen, to find the collaborative space that is most definitely necessary.
All right. So here's a question for both of you. And, Chuck, I'll start with you. And then Rich, if you want to fill in the cracks or things that we don't get to. What is the impact of an incident on a business? Now, I know that sounds very basic, right? It's like, what do you mean? What's the impact? But, I think most people will think around, downtime, loss of money or revenue, right? Or things like that. But yeah, are there other things beyond sort of like what the no does are around an impact for the incident?
Yeah, sure. And in the continuity space, if we always, again, I lead with safety and security is going to be at top of mind. Once that is confirmed, and if we don't go to what makes money within a company, brand reputation is certainly something that is extremely important, especially for cyber events and what could or couldn't be said or released or divulged from a breach. So we have a lot of focused discussions on protecting brand, protecting reputation, and that goes for clients across all industries. Some who have a lot of reporting that have to be done as part of their critical work, missing deadlines, missing the board reports or public filings carries penalties with it, which again goes back to financial ramifications, to disaster events. So, not being able to pay your people, if systems are offline for, again, whatever the reason, paying people, paying your vendors are generally in the top three or four things that must be maintained following a disaster event.
I can imagine not paying people or vendors could create its own incident.
And it
Get that done.
sort of causes a problem.
Rich, what about your perspective?
Well, I would say that Chuck did a great job of covering all the things that I was about to talk about. So at the end of the day, I would say, when I think of the business impact, it's definitely bigger than what people expect because it's not just a security issue. It becomes a people. So to the paying them, that type of element, the processes that are in place in operational issues, and it becomes that very, very fast. Email goes down, single sign-on breaks, financial elements get impacted, legal gets involved, and then the brand damage. That is definitely a topic of discussion during those fires that my team and I are putting out. And I would say, I think outside of the elements that Chuck covered, what I am seeing trend wise is definitely class action lawsuits. When we see these ransomware and these cyber events, it's usually a double extortion type of a situation where a bad actor would come in, they'd operationally impact the environment by doing like an encryption event. But prior to that, there's usually a data exfiltration event, and that's what causes some of that brand damage and some of those challenges with a breach of, obviously potentially PII, health information, those types of sensitive pieces. And what we are seeing at the tail end of these events after the fire's all put out is a nice a nice letter and a nice class action. And then that's usually a conversation that myself and some of the other breach coaches have to have with some of our clients and these victims.
And to stress that collaborative part, Jeff, is while all of the activities that Rich just discussed, the rest of the business is impacted because their work has done something to interrupt I was going to say the word normal. Nobody has normal operations, daily operations of the business. And that's what the continuity has to plan to deal with is there's something that is going to be impacted, that is going to change and be removed or is in downtime. The rest of the business still has to operate. And this is where the collaborative nature between business continuity and cybersecurity really lies. And that's the very heart of the collaboration between the two programs.
So if I'm building out a plan for recovery, whether it's DR or IR or whatever we want to call it, right? Disaster incident response. What are the 3 to 5 things that every plan needs to have? So if I don't have one today and I just need to get something bare bones, at least to say, hey, we've started something and we continue to iterate on it. What are those, couple of things, whether it's 3 or 5, I just kind of pull those out of the air. But what do you think, Chuck, everything should, every plan should have?
Yep. Every plan needs to have some strategy, some alternate way to communicate across your team. You have to have a clear decision maker and a group of decision makers, usually the leaders. Places call them crisis management teams, incident management teams. And that's a collection of individuals generally representing the major parts of the company, of which cyber or the head of IT would be included in that group. You have to have a plan to identify what's most critical. How do we keep it going? Plans to address technological failures and how to recover them. And then Rich on the cyber side.
I would say Chuck's number. But in all seriousness, I would say, really to piggyback off what he had shared, I would say a lot of the clients that I work with and the plans that we kind of work through during these incidents, have those commonalities to what Chuck had just shared, a escalation tree, a escalation path, contact numbers, a lot of these compromises coincide with a lack of trust in your own Microsoft 365 environment. So out of band communication, how do you approach that? And contact numbers are a big piece, as well as escalation points. Hey, what's that number for cyber insurance to call to start some of the processes rolling? So those are big pieces. And I would say part of that, which I would say is also important, is that severity level and matrix. What to do during kind of the onset of an incident. If it's a severity level 5 at the lower end, all the way up to a 1 where you call up all the troops to come and bring them in. So just some good strategies around how to handle the incident, how to handle that business continuity, how to handle the communications, especially out of band, and then how to impact those decisions across the board.
So I was going to ask you later how you guys define an incident, but maybe this is a good time for me to pull that question forward. And Rich, let me stay with you for a second there. You talked about severity, 5 or 1. It could be really anything, right? As long as there's sort of a matrix that explains what that is. What is an incident? And how do you define severity? Because is there a standard way to do it, or is that really organization specific?
I would say it's organizational and industry specific. In like healthcare, there's obviously like the human, life safety impacts. In manufacturing, there's operational downtime. So it could vary from business to business and industry to industry. So to that end, there's no one size fits all. But I would say that you would make a kind of severity matrix based upon some of those key factors and how it overall impacts your business operationally, or from a life safety perspective, and also financially. So usually kind of using a plethora of those types of data points, you can kind of rank these incidents to a certain kind of degree, and then bring in the right team and the right support accordingly.
So, Chuck, when you're thinking about what Rich just said and the severity, do you need that information to help inform what a DR plan looks like? Like, what's the chicken and egg scenario to say, okay, well, here's what we need to plan for versus what's more important than something else, like from that severity level?
Yeah, sure. Good question. And yeah, totally agree with how Rich categorized that. I think an incident depends on the company. I mean, the severity is going to depend on how they view something to be incredibly negatively impacting their daily operations. What I would say is that's the purpose and the function of an enterprise risk program, so that an organization can gauge, estimate, assess their risks across their company, and then they can begin to prioritize the most important, in which then you can plan against those risks. Now, there's a little bit of a difference in the discussion of risk in terms of the enterprise risk versus risk on an emergency management or emergency response. Those risks might be a little bit different on their impacts to an organization.
So let me play some word association or gut check, gut feeling. And Rich, let me start with you. There's
Sure.
this phrase out there that identity is the new perimeter, which I'll be honest, I hate. Shocking. This is the Identity Center podcast. Why do you hate identity is the new perimeter? Because it's not a new perimeter. It's been around forever. It's just people are starting to pay attention to it now. So I'm curious, did I just taint the jury with my thought process on there? Or like when you hear identity is a new perimeter, like what do you think?
Well, I would say from what I do get to see is that in real incidents, it is often the first thing that gets challenged. So, and it's also, it's the first thing that becomes a problem. And it's also the last thing that you might want to be able to trust it again. So I can kind of understand, how people can say, I mean, maybe that's kind of repeated too constantly, but really from an incident command perspective during these ransomware and these types of events, it's 100% accurate. When I think of the perimeter, it used to be just network in versus out. Now it's, who authenticated, what were they allowed to do, and can we really trust that level of access? So I don't feel at this point it's just a security layer anymore. It's more of that operational dependencies. So when I see if at the identity side, if your systems are impacted, you don't just lose security. You're also going to be losing that ability to function. So to me, that's kind of how I would kind of characterize that as that almost a blast radius kind of multiplier for when an event does happen. Thinking about it from identity and governance, making sure that, if that is tight, then when an incident does happen, it's going to be that much more containable. But when you look at it on the flip side, if identity is in a messy state, that privilege sprawl, those stale accounts, those weak controls, those nightmare conversations that I'm having with some of the victims, then that response effort really becomes more blunt force instead of more of a scalpel and more prescriptive. It's going to be exceedingly more disruptive.
Let me ask you, Chuck, the same question. Identity is a new perimeter. Are you seeing identity come up more in DR planning, IR planning, and sort of just that continuity? Or is it still kind of, hey, we got to make sure our firewalls are up and that AD is working, right? Things like that.
Yeah, so my immediate reaction and the first question that comes to mind is, what don't I have? That's what's offline now. Who needs to be in the room to talk? What's our risk assessment? And we go from there. We'll adjust based on the answers to all of those things. That's when I hear that, I just think there's a breach. and something is going to get taken offline. Who do I call to find out what that is? And then we need to get together and talk. That's literally what I would treat that the same for any event.
Something's broken. Let's fix it.
Yep. Something's broken. We have to talk to figure out what's broken, and then how do we fix it? Yep.
Okay. All right. Here's another one. Rich, I'll go back to you. Hackers don't break in, they log in. What do you think of that?
Well, I would say that that equates to what we do see in some capacity. What I would say is that, they're not necessarily breaking things. They're using either, easy creds or blending into that normal activity. So I'd say that when I think of that line, it's probably a good summary of some of the modern response that we get to see. So when we do see what that, like from logs and like that type of analysis that my team does, that activity looks like a real user is going to be a real device, a real session, and some of those normal patterns of users. So that inherently makes that detection harder and harder to ascertain. And when I do look at the response, a majority of what we're after is that identity telemetry than your traditional, virus hunting, which, we still do. We're leveraging our EDR and our tools to accomplish, looking for those indicators of compromise. But really, a lot of the questions that change, instead of did we block that malware or some of those executables, it's really kind of aligned to, can we trust this identity plan right now? Because I would say, more often than not, if you can't trust the identity, that's really where everything else becomes uncertain. Like, how do we know that we can safely turn up some of the systems? How do we know that these backups are going to be okay? These administrator tools, are they being used for good, or are they or are they the threat actor living off the land? There's SaaS applications, cloud consoles, all of that. So overall, I'd say that's really kind of where the attacker's best disguise is what you have in your own environment. That's how they're getting in and how they're staying active.
So let's talk about someone has gotten in. Can you take me through, Rich, like the first couple of hours of what do you discover? What's kind of typical, if there even is a typical, like take me to the first few hours of, oh crap, something's happening and we've got to figure it out.
Well, in my world, it's usually late night, like I said, on Friday evening, and that's where we get that phone call, and it's really focused on a scoping call, and that's.
I mean, they didn't pre-schedule the break-in with you.
Okay,
I mean, that's rude.
Yeah. Well, on the bright side, hopefully, some of the victims they do this right. Those good next steps, and they don't notice something on a Monday and they call me on a Friday, which has happened in the past, and that makes it a lot more harder. But eventually this the event makes its way to my desk, and my team, we hop onto a scoping call, and we learn about the incident from the client and the victim. But when it comes to the first parts of incident, really it's really focused on containment actions or that loss of that identity trust, not necessarily on the malware itself. So we're working to shut down that access. We're stopping that spread. So isolation of the network. We're killing VPN. We're killing site-to-site connections. We're looking at trying to disable accounts. We're working to do password resets for administrator accounts. Again, to reinforce isolating systems that are business critical. That's a big piece for us. A lot of the operations that are ongoing, those end up getting paused because the client and their leadership, we don't know it's safe is at that point. And that's really that common thread is identity. Once we suspect that there's a compromise, we have to take very disruptive actions and very quickly. So stopping the bleed is what we call it. And that coincides with, the core reality, which is, we're going to have self-inflicted downtime, but it's really necessary until we regain that confidence. Because if we feel at that point the attacker has that privileged access, we can't leave things as running around as normal. So, that's really where, again, to reinforce that strong identity governance, it allows us to react more surgically opposed to, pull the plug and, start working backwards that way. But outside of that, post-containment, we're looking to make sure that the victim and the client has a good EDR solution. So, leveraging, some of our tools on that front, and then doing that, the monitoring to make sure that, we're picking it up, running our triages. And that cadence really focuses on communication. So, as Chuck mentioned earlier, communication's key. Out of band, we're spinning up our own email address, or the client's spinning up new email addresses. We're working out of band and moving things forward in a very tactical way. So a lot of conversations, a lot of actions, but very tactical.
Are ransomware and I guess maybe business email compromise and just social engineering in general, are those still sort of like the top ways that people are getting hit, or is there something else that people should be thinking about too? And I guess it wouldn't be an episode of I Take the Center without talking about AI. Is how is AI impacting maybe some of those things?
Sure. So there's a bit to unpack there, but just to kind of talk about how the bad actors are getting in is through a lot of different means. And to your point about phishing emails, credential compromise, that's obviously one approach that the bad actors will take, and a lot of that coincides with artificial intelligence and that elevating the reality of how human some of these conversations are getting to get people to click the link or establish a remote share session. So that definitely does happen. But on the other hand, some of those core competencies, from good patch management to making sure some of your externally facing infrastructure is well patched, a lot of the pieces that we've seen were through vulnerabilities and through approaches through firewall. So not to name too many names from a manufacturer's standpoint, we do see that as a nice opportunity for bad actors to get into the infrastructure for some of our clients and some of the victims. And it's pretty straightforward where they walk in the door. That dwell time isn't your traditional, 10, 15 days of bad actor activity. They are very precise and very scripted on what they do. So it's very interesting to see how some of the dynamic has changed to get a double extortion situation done super fast. And that's what we are seeing.
I don't know if it'll come through when I edit this together, but it was like great timing to hear like sirens going off in the background. When we're talking about how people are getting breached and like what is the thing. So that was like great timing. Like Rich, if you planned that, that was awesome.
Oh, yeah, thanks Chicago for that one.
Chuck, when you hear about some of these things that Rich has been talking about, how much does input like that feed into, hey, we need to either revise or update our DR or incident response plan or whatever that looks like from a continuity standpoint to say, okay, nothing's perfect, right? There's always an opportunity to get better, faster, stronger, smarter. How often should you take inputs like that, say, hey, as much as we tried to plan for everything, here's this other thing that we need to start thinking about. Let's get that included now for next time.
Sure. Any real event that has just happened, there should be some level of debrief. Common terms are lessons learned or after action debriefing, and from there, all plans should be updated based on what was said and the experiences. The plan should be kind of front and center to identify those opportunities to improve those plans. And one of the real key parts of this is to assign first of all, realistic timeframes to updating them, and then you need an owner. So a stuckey, if you will, to do the work. That has to be done. It's, of course, again, best practice. If any program ever gets audited, the auditors will be looking for revisions, update schedules, real events, and then this post-event reporting as part of the preparedness, the planning stages. A lot of that can be templatized, and having an after-action form that's readily accessible. And frankly, some of those forms, that document the proceedings, the high-level decision making that's been done, that should all be occurring live during these command level discussions on when decisions were made and by whom, and the specifics that go into them and the rationale to support. When Rich's team is activated and they respond, there's a lot of data associated with their response, and that should be documented because all of that goes in to the post-event report. And I would imagine, Rich and team deal with the insurance companies. I would imagine they want that information as part of their triage and their efforts associated with the policies. And so, just across the board, that's all good, practice, best practice as part of any real event. So that's after things are done, and these briefings should be held very quickly. Even though people are exhausted, you tend to forget. And so, hours to day, like a day or two, is the best time to have a discussion about it.
when emotions and nerves are still raw.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you sparked a question in my head. You mentioned, compliance and legal and insurance and things like that to go like that, like cyber insurance. Are you guys seeing any benefits to an organization that has like strong DR plans with like a reduction in cyber insurance rates or things along those lines to say, hey, if we do get hit, here is how we are able to minimize, the blast radius of something that might go wrong? And whoever wants to jump in first, feel free to have at it. If there is in fact a reduction there.
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely a conversation that clients and entities should definitely have with their broker and their insurance providers, just to kind of see what options are out there, to really lower some of those costs. But overall, I would say that from a perspective of those being almost requirements now, to have a good EDR, to have incident response plan, to have a tabletop test to validate your IR plan. Those are starting to become kind of more, not nice to haves, but more of those, you should be having these things as part of, you getting insurance. So a lot of those, I would expect to get really factored in and definitely should be part of those conversations.
Chuck, do you see anything with, cyber insurance rates with, DR planning and incident response where maybe there's advantage there?
No. That would be much more Rich's
Okay.
lane. But what we do see is that there being gaps in the planning around their cyber insurance and the details around that. And so, again, that takes on the planning side some collaboration with legal to understand the terms of the policies, because that most certainly affects the crisis management plan. It affects the DR plan, the BC plan, and the cyber IR plan. All those plans are impacted by the details that are in those insurance policies.
What's an example of a gap that, that you can share with other people? It's like, hey, this is something to think about.
Sure. And Rich and I actually just came across this right before the holiday season, and we're coming across it more and more in exercises is really where it shows itself, and that's in the response time. And so folks just assume that in their insurance that it may say within, or I don't know, it's within 12 hours and completely a hypothetical situation. However, there are subtleties around the 12 hours. You see that also in the SLAs for your SaaS products too, is when does the clock start ticking on the 12 hours? Is it when the event happens? Is it when the event is documented? Is it when the event is reported? Is it reported out to the, let's say, the insurance company? The, many of the agreements have those details in there, and they vastly can affect on the continuity side the activities that are developed to handle downtime and workarounds, because 12 hours may mean 12 hours from which, let's say, the SaaS provider responds to you. Well, that could be 36 hours after the event happened, and it's when their clock starts ticking on the response, not yours. And so now you are a day and a half or 2 days into an event, and you're waiting, and the legal term of what's in those agreements has dictated some of your response and your activities, and will impact your recovery for sure.
And I
So
would just kind of add into that, a lot of that is avoidable. I
Yes,
mean, knowing your contracts,
that's right.
knowing kind of the vendors and some of those key dependencies that you do have, so that way you can build that into your incident response plan and kind of focus some of those efforts ahead of time. So that way you can be a little bit more diligent and deliberate about kind of, hey, this happens, I need to contact this person immediately along these lines to ensure that the operational impact will be as minimal as possible. Because otherwise, you're going to be sitting there waiting for some of those responses, and they're not contractually obligated to help you until within that SLA.
Yeah, that's an
so who's
excellent point. Like you have a self-inflicted negative consequence, and it's all because it's awareness.
well, those are the worst ones to inflict.
Yeah, right.
And this leads to the question of like, who's responsible for this? Like understanding what those metrics are for responsibility and response times and all that stuff? Is that the CISO? Is it some other part of the organization? Like, who's responsible to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this?
So I think kind of trying to I mean, that almost gets into that finger pointing piece, but it should be a collaborative effort where it's a shared sense of ownership for the business. I mean, you would probably want to kind of build that into a racy sort of matrix to understand, what that really looks like to be that much more effective on how that really coincides with good contract review policies, for critical vendors, how to approach the strategy surrounding those SLAs and what those expectations are, and ultimately how do you kind of enforce those and kind of build those into your renewals and so on and so forth. So I think kind of that's an area that is a shared responsibility that the business should really kind of take on together as a group.
Absolutely
Okay.
agreed. Yeah, absolutely agreed.
So my last question before we start to wrap things up is, we like to make this valuable for people, and hopefully people have found the conversation valuable. I know I have. This is not an area that I'm an expert in, and so I rely on expertise from people like you. What is something that, if I'm an identity professional somewhere out there in the world, right? Could be I'm a SailPoint administrator, I'm a ping administrator, I'm a CyberArk, I'm a name your product, right? Or maybe I'm an architect or a PM. How does their role come into this world of recovery, response, and planning? Like, what's something that you could say, hey, identity people, here's what you should be thinking about? And I don't know, Chuck, maybe I'll start with you, and then Rich, let you have the final word on it.
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty hard question to answer on the business side. And I sort of touched on it at the beginning, and I think it goes back to staffing and availability and support. But what do I mean by that? I think the identity professionals in leadership, especially, have to have some level of succession planning if they're unavailable for whatever the reason. It doesn't matter. And if they are unavailable, 10%, 20% staff, 30% staff, 40% staff, which are not unreasonable, four sets of percentages, how will the organization respond to an event that involves them? And where will support come from if it's needed? How can it be emergent, procured, and an emergency environment? And most places have protocols and procedures around just staffing support, and it's not one phone call. Um, and knowing how to get that, because as I said in the beginning, everyone assumes the technology professionals are available 100% around the clock all of the time. Nobody plans if they're not. and and so from my end of the operational resilience paradigm, that would be my concern right out of the gate.
Yeah, that availability is
Mm-hmm.
is something to be aware of. I remember, and Rich, I'm not sure if you remember this from way back in Chicago. I think there was a blizzard like 2010 or 2012.
Yes, 2019. Actually, I just used it. I just used it in a scenario for an exercise last week.
So this was like even before that, because I was working at Walgreens at the time,
Mhm.
and we got like 6 feet of snow, like
Mhm.
literally 6 feet of snow in the northwest suburbs. And I remember having a Bluetooth earbud in one, trying to reset people's passwords because the VPN was crashing because too many people were trying to log in, while I'm out in the driveway trying to unearth the snow out. So that availability is certainly a concern, is something to be thinking about. Rich, for all the identity people listening out there, like, what's your plea to them to help you, recover from incidents?
Sure. Well, to think through it, I would say from a identity practitioner standpoint, it's those actions prior to an incident that are going to be critical because, during those incidents, that's, where they have the opportunity to take those proactive actions and essentially, like I mentioned earlier, reduce that blast radius and really speed up that recovery. So really helping elevate the ability to make kind of those actions controlled, visible, and really recoverable. But thinking about what you just asked me, to how to prepare and how to kind of react through it when I think of before. So think about maybe reducing some of that standing privilege. So PAM, just-in-time access, thinking about strengthening MFA for privileged users and along the VPN. Those are things that are usually part of the root cause analysis that, my team is able to ascertain as a result of our investigation. Conditional access is a big one, risky signing controls, service account governance is a big piece. And more importantly, the logging that allows my team to kind of get into, the who, what, where, and, how they got in. And, one thing that I would say that often goes underlooked is that like a clear break glass process that's tested. A lot of people don't think about that. And then, during an incident, when I would say that, the teams that I'm working with, understanding, that analysis and clarity around what accounts to disable versus preserve, how are we going to rotate credentials without breaking the business? That's always a fun conversation. Like, how are we going to disseminate these passwords? It gets challenging sometimes. How to install a single sign-on safely, thinking about validating, access is clean post-containment, post-containment actions. And then what are we doing to kind of continue to monitor and be in a heightened state of alert for any kind of recompromise? So really, I'm looking for their help to act as a part of our side of the response efforts to stabilize that trust and that access. So that way, when we start flipping the switches and things coming back online, we're more confident in that overall recovery.
Okay. So I appreciate you guys like lending your expertise here. Again, this is an area where, people need to be aware of it and they need to understand how their role fits into it. So I appreciate you guys like lending your expertise here again. I feel like this conversation was somewhat of a downer to some degree because we're talking about like breaches and, oh man, bad things have happened and how are we going to fix it and how are we going to prepare for the worst. So I want to end our show on a lighter note, and the key is lighter. What is something that you guys are looking forward to this year, 2026? Chuck, do you have anything that you're looking for? And please, I hope you do.
With that lead in about being a downer, I mean, if I answer no, that'd be terrible, right? Yeah, no. One of my children's graduating from college this year, so I'm really looking forward to going to her graduation. So that is definitely something that's not too far away, a couple of months. So very proud.
That's a major milestone.
Yeah,
Congrats.
major milestone. So very proud. Yes.
All right. How about Rich? What are you looking forward to this year?
So I got two things, and both of them are probably today and tomorrow.
Rich must be doing real well. He's got two things he's looking forward to.
So I would say that the role that I play for cyber response, we live by the seat of our pants, and we're always doing something crazy. And one of the partners I work with always has a saying, you never know when you're going to, get your next good meal. So make sure every meal counts. So I'm going out to dinner tonight, going to have a nice meal. That's one. And then two, I'd say that, it revolves around, family. And I feel that, when I have these long days, it's nice to get home, hang out with the kids. I got like a 2 and 6-year-old. So it's nice to be able to shift away from the lens of, hey, incident command, really rigid, focusing on kind of saving the day for some of our clients, shifting and kind of like getting to relax a little bit. And I'd say that's kind of what I get to look forward to.
Recovery is important. So I got to ask, where are you going to dinner? Former Chicagoan. I go, whenever I'm back, I try to hit Portillo's and Giordano's. You just can't get good hot dogs or pizza here in North Carolina. Sorry, North Carolinians.
No, tonight's probably nothing too crazy, just RPM steak. My wife has me on a very regimented diet, and she's not around tonight, so I think I'm going to fulfill my my dreams with a nice steak. So medium rare and full of happiness.
All right, nothing wrong with that. Let's see. What am I looking forward to? Well, my wife and I are both turning 50 this year. So I'm sure it'll be something around that. And honestly, more international travel. So I think heading back to Berlin, my first trip was last year. I'm looking forward to going again in May for the conference and, seeing some familiar faces. I don't know if I'll be able to like extend the trip or not. Last year, my wife and she met me in Berlin after the conference. And then we went to Amsterdam, which was amazing. I had such a great time with that. I don't know if we're going to do the same thing or not. We've got a new puppy in the house. And so we're in the middle of like puppy training. So hopefully by May, be in a good spot. But I am looking forward to travel and getting out there.
Awesome.
Outstanding.
All right. Let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Thank you so much, guys, for being part of this. I'm going to have in our show notes LinkedIn connection information. So if people have questions, whether it's to commend Rich on his steak choice or Chuck to congratulate, the graduation coming up for your family there, that'd be awesome. And if you have any questions for us, you can always drop them into LinkedIn, reach out to Jim and myself. Our LinkedIn profiles there as well. Website, idacpodcast.com. All of our discount codes are there. Again, hope to see people at conferences in the future, and we'll go leave it there. So thanks everyone for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.